Hi, I'm Yetta. My family told me not to come home for Thanksgiving, said they'd pretend I didn't exist, like I was a ghost haunting their perfect dinner. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding out they'd been rewriting my story for years. Behind my back, they drained my savings, erased me from the will, and even faked an apology email in my name. And still, they called me the problem. How do you survive a family that smiles to your face and sells you out behind closed doors? I stepped out of the coroner's building into the bite of early snow. The sky in Fort Collins was a dull sheet of gray, and flakes drifted down like they couldn't commit to being real. It was 3 days before Thanksgiving, and despite the 14-hour shift, I should have felt a flicker of something, excitement maybe. But my phone buzzed before I even reached the car. A voicemail. From Mom. Her voice was soft, like she was rehearsing kindness. Hi, honey. So, listen. We're thinking it might be better if you didn't come home this year. Things are a bit delicate, with Aileen. She's really sensitive to energy, and it's just... Let's keep things light this time, all right? I stood in the parking lot with melting snow gathering on my shoulders. Sensitive to energy. That's what we're calling it now. I didn't press play again. I didn't have to. I knew the tone, the sugar-coated cruelty. They didn't want me there, and they didn't even have the nerve to own it. By the time I sat in my car, engine humming low, another message pinged in. Elliot. Hey, did you forget to pay Dad's insurance? Mom says it didn't go through. That was all he wrote. No hi, no how are you? Not even a thanks. Just an assumption. An accusation wrapped in family duty. What he didn't say, what he never said, was that I'd been paying that damn premium every month for 5 years, quietly, consistently, without ever being asked, without ever being thanked. I didn't answer him. Instead, I drove home, hands tight on the wheel. The windshield wipers squeaked with every pass, and it started to feel like they were mocking me. Tick-tick, like they were counting down the seconds until I snapped. At home, the bags I'd packed for the trip were still by the door. 1 suitcase, 1 garment bag. A green sweater hung inside, soft and plain, the kind you wear when you're trying to be festive without being obvious. I'd even wrapped gifts. Small things, thoughtful things, for people who decided I was more convenient as a shadow than a sister. I didn't cry. That would have felt like giving them a gift. Instead, I sat in my scrubs on the edge of the couch and stared at the twinkling lights of the tiny Christmas tree I'd put up 2 nights ago. The smell of cinnamon and pine from the candle still lingered, pretending it lived in a different reality. Then I got up. I opened my laptop and pulled up my banking dashboard, clicked into recurring payments, deleted them, every single one. The insurance premium? Gone. The shared Netflix account? Canceled. The backup savings I'd quietly set aside in case their pipes froze again this winter? Frozen, literally and financially. I moved through it with surgical calm, like I was closing a file on the dead. Which, in a way, I was. You don't want me there? I said out loud. Then you don't get me in pieces either. I turned off the tree lights. No ceremony, just the flick of a switch. And then I walked into my bedroom and stared at the open suitcase. Last year, I'd spent 2 days making rosemary stuffing from scratch. I'd brought a handmade ornament for everyone, even Elliot, who once gave me a gas station gift card for Christmas and laughed when I looked surprised. That same year, Carla forgot I was the one who organized the entire meal. She told the neighbors Aileen had done it all because she has such a lovely touch. When I corrected her, she smiled too big and said, "Oh, I just assumed. You're always so clinical." I'd smiled back. I'd swallowed it, like I'd swallowed everything else for 35 years. But now I closed the suitcase, zipped it slowly, and shoved it back into the hall closet. There was no performance left in me. They didn't have to slam a door in my face. They just left it slightly ajar and made sure I knew not to walk through. I stood at the window and watched the snow settle over my car like dust on a memory. Inside, the apartment was silent. I liked it better that way. No one yelling, no one asking for favors, no one pretending I was too intense, too serious, too much. Just me. I whispered, "I see you now." Not in anger, not even in grief. Just clarity. The next morning didn't feel like morning. I barely slept. I'd paced the apartment long after midnight, deleting contact after contact from my phone, pausing only to stare at the blinking lights on the tree that was supposed to mean something. It was just decoration now, set dressing for a life that didn't want me in the picture. By 9 a.m., I was back at work, a cup of black coffee in my hand, a folder of post-mortem reports under my arm. I made it as far as the hallway outside the lab before Dr. Hennings, my supervisor, stopped me. "Yetta, can we chat for a minute in my office?" His voice was too neutral, the kind you use when you're trying to soften the blow. I nodded, set my folder on the bench, and followed him inside. He didn't sit. That was the first red flag. He stood behind his desk, fiddling with a pen. "We got a call. Yesterday afternoon." My gut already knew. My head caught up a second later. Someone claiming to be a family member called HR, asking if you were under any kind of psychological supervision. Said they were concerned that you'd been unstable lately. My hands went cold. I kept them clenched around the coffee cup. "Did they give a name?" He hesitated. "They said they were your father." Of course, the man who couldn't figure out how to open PDFs without my help now decided he was qualified to diagnose my mental health from 3 states away. "I'm fine," I said. "You know that." He nodded quickly, awkwardly. "I told HR the same. They didn't take it seriously, but I thought you should know." I left his office without another word. The second I stepped into the stairwell, I stopped walking. I needed the silence. Just a few seconds to keep the rage from climbing out of my throat. He tried to ruin me. Not privately, professionally. My phone buzzed again. A message from my downstairs neighbor, Pam. "Hope you're okay. Carla told us you've been under a lot of pressure lately. Made some chicken soup if you want any. P.S. You're so brave. Hang in there." I stared at the screen like it had just slapped me. Carla had been talking to the neighbors about me, telling them I was on leave for exhaustion, painting me like I was fragile, broken, needing rest and care. They weren't just trying to silence me. They were writing a new version of me, one that would be easier to dismiss. I walked back into the lab, handed off my reports to the tech team, and excused myself for a break. My supervisor didn't argue. Maybe he thought I needed it. Back home, I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, phone in my lap. For a moment, I didn't move. Then I opened the voicemail app. No new messages, just the old one from Mom. Still soft, still fake, still echoing in the back of my mind. I remembered being 10, coming home crying after a girl at school shoved me for answering too many questions in class. Carla had rolled her eyes and said, "Well, you don't have to raise your hand every single time. Let others shine too." Stephen had chimed in with, "She was probably just sick of your robot voice." That had been the beginning. I spent years learning how to shrink myself. Don't speak too firmly, sounds cold. Don't lead too much, sounds bossy. Don't correct people, makes you look mean. I didn't even notice when the act became permanent, when the role I played became the only version of me they recognized. And still, it was never enough, not warm enough, not sweet enough, not invisible enough. I'd always assumed, deep down, that if I just did more, if I proved myself a little harder, they'd stop looking at me like I was some stain they couldn't wash out. But now I knew the truth. They weren't uncomfortable because I was broken. They were uncomfortable because I didn't break the way they wanted me to. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, sat down at the counter with my laptop. The HR portal took less than 5 minutes. I filed an official note about the call, detailed the conversation, cited the name, the implication, the damage, uploaded it as a matter of record. Then I opened my personal files, removed Stephen from my emergency contacts, blocked his number, changed the password on my home security system, called the locksmith to rekey the apartment. I moved with clarity, not panic. I wasn't crying anymore. I was clearing the field. At noon, I sent one final email. Subject, financial support termination, effective immediately. It went to Carla's email. A short note. From this day forward, all financial contributions and emergency supports I've covered, insurance, medical deductibles, subscriptions, utility backups, will cease. This is not punishment. This is protection. Then I hit send. I closed the laptop and exhaled. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me invisible. They wanted me erased. But this time, I got there first. The apartment was quiet again. The kind of quiet that didn't soothe. It hovered. Not because I needed space to think, but because I had too many places my mind was trying to go. I stood in the kitchen, my hand still warm from the mug I'd been holding, and stared at my laptop, still open, still on the email I'd just sent my mother. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Not hollow, but cleared out, like someone had come in with a shovel and removed the wreckage, and now I was just left with the dirt. I walked over to the bookshelf, reached for a folder I hadn't touched in years. TV Archives, the label read. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside, but I did anyway. Inside was a script, notes, camera angles, a contract I never signed. 2 years ago, I had been offered a segment on a national medical series, Trailblazers in STEM. A producer had reached out after reading a paper I'd published about postmortem diagnostics in rural hospitals. I was going to be featured alongside female engineers, astronauts, epidemiologists. The shoot date was set for mid-May. They were flying me to New York, had already sent wardrobe guidelines and a media prep packet. I never told anyone at work. I wanted to surprise them. But 3 days before the trip, Carla collapsed in the backyard. The ER visit showed nothing serious. Dehydration, mild fatigue, probably brought on by her refusal to eat properly or drink anything besides wine and diet soda. But when I called from my hotel room in Denver, my stopover before the NYC flight, she sounded faint, dramatic. I don't think I'll make it through the week without you. I canceled the shoot. I drove back that night. I brought groceries, sorted her meds, scheduled follow-ups. I even stayed 2 extra nights to watch over her. She never said thank you. What she did say 2 weeks later was, I guess you didn't want the fame that bad after all. Some people just aren't built for the spotlight. I'd laughed it off at the time. But now I saw it. She wasn't worried about my spotlight. She was worried I'd shine too far away from her. I closed the folder and sat on the carpet. The lights on the bookshelf blinked in the dimness, the tree still unplugged since that first night. My phone was silent. Nobody had called. And then I opened a second folder. Legal Docs Elliot. This one wasn't as thick, but it hurt more. 3 years ago, Elliot had launched an art exhibit downtown, a collection of digital installations exploring grief and time. It got local buzz. A junior designer at the gallery where he displayed them claimed one of the main pieces was a duplicate of her thesis project from design school. I believed him when he said it was a coincidence. I defended him to the gallery board, used my contacts to hush the story, found a clause in her student contract that made her public claims technically breachable. He got to keep the piece on display. That night, when I told him it was handled, he didn't thank me. He just smirked and said, "You're a good sister, even if you're boring." I had nodded. Like a fool. I remembered sitting on the floor of my old apartment, staring at a blank screen while the rest of the world posted photos from his show. He didn't tag me once, not in the credits, not in the behind-the-scenes posts. It was like I didn't exist. But now I knew. I wasn't boring. I was convenient. I flipped through the rest of the file. Old texts, screenshots of statements I'd written to protect him, a photo of him smiling beside the installation I helped salvage. Delete, delete, delete. I cleaned out the folder, moved the whole thing to trash, and emptied it. Then, without really thinking, I got up and opened the kitchen drawer. I pulled out a matchbook, walked to the bathroom, dropped the interview script into the sink, lit one match, watched it burn, slow, then fast. The paper curled in on itself like a secret it no longer wanted to hold. I didn't feel dramatic. I felt clean. This wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about finally erasing a version of me that existed solely to absorb their mistakes, to carry their messes like some family janitor they never paid, never acknowledged, and certainly never cared about. I stood by the sink until the last ember fizzled. Then I turned off the light and went to bed. It didn't matter if I couldn't sleep. I'd finally stopped dreaming of them. The next morning was thick with that strange kind of silence that happens after something burns down. Too quiet to be peaceful, too cold to feel clean. I stood by the window of my apartment, watching the frost creep along the edges of the glass, when my phone lit up with a voicemail notification. Sharon. I hadn't heard from her since summer, and even then it was just a forwarded joke about dog hair and motherhood. This message wasn't funny. Yetta? Her voice cracked through the speaker. I don't even know what to say. They're saying you ruined Thanksgiving, but you weren't even there. Aileen left halfway through the meal. There was shouting. Then your name came up, and now it's all over the place. I didn't move. My name, my absence, that was enough to ruin a holiday? A few seconds later, another alert popped up. A missed call from Carla. I let it ring out. Then came the inevitable follow-up. A syrupy voicemail layered in faux concern. Sweetheart, it's been a crazy day. We're all just trying to keep things calm, okay? You know Aileen. She's very sensitive. Someone brought up hospitals, and she just couldn't handle it. We all thought it might be better if you could talk to her, maybe help smooth things over. Just tell her you didn't mean anything by it. I wasn't even there. And still, somehow, whatever had gone wrong, whatever drama had unfolded, they had dragged my name through the center of it. I called Sharon back. She looked shaken, Sharon said. Aileen, I mean. She said something about hearing jokes, about you, about your work. Then she saw that photo again, the one from your graduation, and left. Just stood up and walked out. Of course. They left that photo up. They didn't take it down. Didn't even bother to hide the one visual reminder of the daughter they'd disinvited. It was always just easier to pretend I was a problem rather than admit they were the cause. I didn't need more detail. I'd heard enough. And then, as if timed perfectly to punctuate my fury, a notification slid across my screen. Instagram. Aileen had posted. The photo was a grainy picture of a wine glass on a table, but the caption hit like a stone. Some people smile while mocking the woman who saved my grandmother's life. That's not family, that's theater. The comments were already piling up, people asking what happened, others tagging Elliot. His art page was getting flooded with people calling him a fraud, a manipulator. Some even linked back to his old plagiarism accusations. Finally, the truth had legs. And I wasn't the one running it. I didn't feel vindicated. But I did feel something unfamiliar, witnessed. They weren't just losing control of me anymore. They were losing control of their story. I was still reading through the threads when Stephen called. I answered. I assume you've seen the post, he said. No hello, no how are you? You need to talk to Aileen. Tell her it was a misunderstanding, that she took it out of context. And why would I do that? I said, voice calm. Because she's making us look like monsters. She tagged your photo. She's got followers in that, whatever, art scene. New York people talk. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Let the silence build between us until he said the one thing I was waiting for. She's ruining your brother's career. There it was. Not about truth, not about me, just damage control. And they thought I'd help clean up again. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even hang up. I just let the quiet do what my words never could. The knock came just after 9. I'd just made tea, let it steep too long, and left it untouched. Rain tapped against the window pane, steady and cold. I almost ignored it. Then it came again, harder this time. I approached the door with a sense I hadn't felt since medical school rounds. Prepared, but with my guard raised. I looked through the peephole. Carla, Stephen, Elliot, my entire family, on my doorstep like some kind of delegation from a regime I'd defected from. I considered not opening it, letting them stand there and soak, but I did. Because if they came all this way, I wanted to see how far they'd go to spin the story. Carla's smile was tight and wet. Her trench coat stuck to her body like desperation. Stephen looked like a man forced to play diplomat. And Elliot, well, he didn't meet my eyes. We were worried, Carla said, stepping inside before being invited. You haven't answered your phone. Stephen followed. Elliot hesitated, then trailed after them like a kid caught between detention and recess. I said nothing, just closed the door behind them. Carla took a seat like she owned the place. We just want to talk, Stephen added, clearing his throat. This has gone far enough. The post, the silence, the tension. You've made your point. Elliot leaned against the wall, arms folded. You're the only one she'll listen to, Yetta. You know that. Ah, so this wasn't a concern visit. This was strategy. I stood by the kitchen island, arms crossed, letting them run their script. Carla softened her voice like she was in a Hallmark movie. We're a family. Families fight, sure. But this level of division, it's not healthy. I turned to Stephen. And what do you call a father who calls his daughter's boss to suggest she's unstable? His face twitched. It was out of context. I was trying to express concern. No, I said, walking past them toward my desk. You were trying to discredit me. I opened the drawer. They watched as I pulled out paper after paper. Stapled bills, bank records, email printouts, check copies, insurance confirmations. All the quiet things I'd covered for years. The things they pretended didn't exist. I laid them out on the coffee table. You want to talk about healthy? I asked. Let's start with honesty. Let's start with numbers. You think I've punished you? No, I just stopped volunteering. Carla stood, smoothing her coat like this was beneath her. We never asked for this kind of martyrdom. No, I agreed. You didn't. You expected it. Then I looked at Elliot. You were 30, Elliot. 30. And I still paid off your car insurance because Mom said it was too hard to manage right now. You never even said thank you. His eyes darted. Why are you bringing this up now? I turned back to Carla. You changed the will, I said. Dead quiet. Carla blinked. You removed me. Reassigned assets. Elliot gets the house, the stocks, the studio rights. I get memories. Stephen shifted uncomfortably. You were working. You had your own income. And that's what made me disposable? It's not like that, Carla said. No? I walked to the door. Then tell me what it's like. Tell me what it's like to sit at a dinner table laughing about the doctor who saved someone's life and not even realize she's your daughter. No one spoke. You came here for cleanup, I said. But the fire's out. All that's left is truth. I opened the door. You need to leave. Carla's voice cracked. Yetta, I won't call the cops, but next time I won't say it twice. They stood there for a moment like actors who forgot their lines. Then, without another word, they walked out. Stephen first. Carla followed. Elliot glanced back once but said nothing. I watched them walk down the hall, their footsteps damp and heavy. No one looked back. Neither did I. The apartment had finally gone still. Not quiet in the way it gets at midnight when the world outside softens, but in the way a room does after being stirred up, examined, judged, then left alone. Like the silence wasn't natural, but imposed, fabricated. They hadn't touched anything during the visit. Not physically, but somehow it felt like everything had been handled. The cushions, the bookshelves, the coffee mug on the counter. Even the air felt sifted through, worn down, contaminated. So I cleaned every corner, every surface, more from instinct than necessity. I vacuumed behind the couch, wiped down the fridge door, washed the curtains, scrubbed the bathroom tile. Not because they'd made a mess, but because something inside me needed to reclaim the space, needed it to feel like mine again. 3 days later, just as I was finally beginning to concentrate on work, Aileen messaged me. Thanks for your email, she wrote. I was confused at first, but I appreciate the apology. I stared at the screen. What email? I hadn't sent her anything. I hadn't even replied to her last post. My stomach turned, a sick twist of confusion and dread. I typed back instantly. Can you forward it to me? She did. Less than a minute later, the forwarded message hit my inbox. Subject line. I'm sorry for everything. The sender address was mine, or almost. Just one letter off. A near-perfect imitation. Close enough that anyone scanning quickly wouldn't notice the difference. But I noticed. I opened the email. It was polished, clean. The kind of language you find in self-help blogs or mediation scripts. Artificially balanced, overly measured. I deeply regret any pain I've caused, it read. I take full responsibility for the past and wish you healing and peace moving forward. It signed off with, sincerely, take care always. I froze. I never used phrases like that, not even when I was trying to be diplomatic, and I sure as hell didn't apologize for telling the truth. Someone had written this pretending to be me. Someone had gone out of their way to impersonate not just my email, but my entire voice, only stripped of its spine, rewritten to sound submissive, apologetic, hollow. I didn't need to guess who. The same people who'd shown up uninvited, who acted concerned but kept scanning the apartment like it was a crime scene. The same ones who raised me to believe that silence was a virtue, and then mocked me for being distant. This wasn't just petty, it was calculated. I was still processing it when my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Marla, an old friend from the Brooklyn art scene. We hadn't talked much lately, but we'd always kept tabs on each other from a distance. She'd been there back when I was still finding my voice, before I ever imagined I'd need to defend it like this. "You might want to see this," she wrote. She attached a video clip. I clicked play. At first, I didn't understand what I was hearing. It was my voice, clear as day. But not my words, not entirely. Some people are too fragile to handle the truth. Cold, condescending, detached. Then it hit me. The panel, Boston, 3 years ago, a conference on trauma-informed science. I'd been one of the closing speakers. The full quote had been, "Some people are too fragile to handle the truth right away, so it's our job as professionals to help them get there, safely." But the way they clipped it, it made me sound like I thought fragility was a weakness, like I had no empathy, like I saw trauma as an inconvenience. I scrolled down. The clip was already making its way through Aileen's network. Reposted, recaptioned, a parade of reactions that all pointed in the same direction. Underneath, someone had commented, "If this is who she really is, I get why the family cut ties." That line stuck to me like gum on a shoe. I read it 3 times, then closed the thread. There it was. A version of the story, already told, already believed. A version that didn't include me, not the real me, just the caricature they'd constructed. The cold sister, the difficult daughter, the arrogant expert. But this time, something was different. I didn't spiral. I didn't panic. I got organized. I pulled open the drawer next to my desk and took out the slim black folder I'd labeled legal. Inside were documents I'd prepared months ago, just in case. The number for my employment lawyer, a printed copy of my workplace's defamation policy, a template for a cease and desist letter, pre-filled with everything except the recipient's name. Within an hour, I'd filed impersonation and defamation reports across every platform that hosted the fake email or the clipped video. I sent an incident report to HR, not out of fear for my job, but because I wanted a record. I wasn't just reacting, I was documenting. Then, I sent one final message to Aileen. For the record, I didn't send that email, and I don't apologize for speaking the truth. No emotion, no extra explanation, just clarity. That night, I made tea. Chamomile this time. Sat by the window. Let the city lights flicker and bleed through the glass. Let myself exhale. By morning, something unexpected had happened. A Twitter thread had started gaining traction. Someone, anonymous but clearly tech-savvy, had posted the full video from the panel. No cuts, no edits, just the actual quote, with context. The caption was simple. Context matters. And this woman, she was right. The replies started rolling in, slowly at first, then with momentum. Whoever clipped that should be sued. This is why people record everything these days. She didn't yell, she filed paperwork. That one made me smile. Because yes, exactly. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made threats. I hadn't fought dirty. I just made it undeniable. I didn't post a rebuttal. Didn't explain. Didn't thank the anonymous poster. For once, I didn't have to claw back every inch of my name. The ground was holding. The truth had started leaking through the cracks they tried to seal, and I was still standing. Not louder, just sharper, and very, very clear. The next morning, frost coated the world outside like a warning. A delicate, deceptive white, brittle, temporary, and dangerous if you didn't respect it. I stood by the window, watching as the sun tried and failed to warm the frozen streets. Everything felt on edge, like nature itself understood that a line had been crossed. I was stirring coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic, when my phone lit up with a call. Aileen. She never called, not in years. Our conversations were texts, short check-ins, or none at all. For her to call now meant something had shifted. My gut braced for it. "Hey," I answered, voice flat with caution. "Hey," she echoed. But something was off. Her tone, usually composed, even graceful, sounded raw, frayed at the edges like fabric tugged one too many times. "Someone sent me something," she said slowly. "Pages. From your journal. My grip on the mug tightened, steam brushing my face like a slap. What? They were in a manila envelope, she said. No return address, just pages, dozens of them. It's your handwriting, Yetta. Notes, personal ones, dated, messy, detailed. There were passwords, sketches, things I know you never meant anyone to read. My mind went cold. She wasn't done. There was a typed note inside, too. It said I should have think twice before stirring things up again, that I'd regret it if I kept talking, that this is just a sample. There it was. They'd escalated. This wasn't damage control anymore. This was a declaration. The war had gone personal. It wasn't just about silencing me. They were targeting anyone who dared to stand close. I thought you should know, she added, her voice cracking. And I'm sorry. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to believe someone would do that to you. This isn't your fault, I said, keeping my voice steady. And you don't have to be afraid of them. But you are, aren't you? I paused. Then calmly, no, not anymore. We ended the call quietly, but something had shifted. Whatever weight Aileen had been carrying, she wasn't carrying it alone anymore, and neither was I. I walked straight to my desk, pulled out my external drives, old ones I hadn't touched in years. I combed through archived folders, backups of backups, scanned everything for possible leaks. Then I saw it. A folder labeled mom_medical_rec_2015. Seemed harmless enough, until I saw it had been shared. Not just saved, but mirrored on a second account. Elliot's, an old shared Google folder from when I still believed shared access meant shared trust. He had access. He kept it. Inside were scanned images of my journals, pages I wrote on night shifts, when I was exhausted and vulnerable, password exports from an old journaling app, screenshots of late-night rants, grief entries, poems I never finished. Every fragment of me he could collect, like trophies. He hadn't even tried to hide it. He'd taken my most human moments, my private confusion, frustration, fears, and wrapped them in poison, stripped them of context, mailed them to someone already raw with grief, hoping it would make me look monstrous. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I got angry. Because this wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. And when people like Elliot cross that line, they think it's genius. They think leaking someone's diary will unravel them. But all it did was ignite something I'd already doused in gasoline. I called Aileen back. You need to hear this, I told her. Not because I want anything from you, but because you deserve the truth. What they did to you, to me, wasn't clumsy. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. It was designed. They're not chaotic. They're calculated. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. I'm not afraid of them, not anymore. And for the first time, I believed her. That night, I didn't scroll Twitter. I didn't check Instagram. Instead, I logged into a professional board I rarely used, one of those slow academic platforms where people post research updates or conference schedules. And I typed one line, family isn't who shares your blood, it's who doesn't weaponize your past. No hashtags, no tags, no names, no mess. Just the truth. It didn't go viral, it didn't need to, but it landed. Screenshots of the post started quietly circulating. I noticed it in private messages from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months. One said simply, "Took guts." Another, "Glad someone finally said it." I didn't reply, didn't need to. Meanwhile, I kept watching, quietly, calmly. While they scrambled. Elliot's artist page? Quieter, noticeably. 2 sponsors pulled their names from his latest show. A glowing blog feature from last spring vanished without explanation. His press coverage, once frequent, went silent. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't explain. Just silence. And somehow that silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. I wasn't naive. I knew they'd try again. People like that don't retreat quietly. They flail, they scratch, they strike from shadows. But this time, they were on the back foot. And for once, I wasn't the one cleaning up the mess. I wasn't the one explaining, defending, or trying to smooth over the damage. Let them drown in the wreckage they built. I had survived it all. And now? I was done being quiet. The wind had stilled. Snow remained, but now it was firm beneath my boots, not falling in chaos like the week before. Consequences were quiet like that. They didn't shout. They didn't kick in doors. They whispered behind closed boardroom meetings. They showed up in email threads and press releases you weren't CC'd on. Elliot was no longer listed on the roster for the Emerging Voices of Visual Art Winter Showcase. His name had disappeared from the brochure and the digital flyer. One of the curators issued a post on their personal account that read, "We stand with artists who lift others, not those who tear them down from behind closed doors." That was it. No fanfare, no hashtags, just action. I didn't share the post. I didn't need to. It wasn't just my voice anymore echoing in the canyon. Others were finally calling out what I'd lived through in silence. That same afternoon, Sharon rang my buzzer. She never visited. She was the kind of relative who stayed neutral like Switzerland and told herself it was wisdom, not avoidance. She didn't come empty-handed. "It's old," she said, handing me a printed email. "But you deserve to see it." The subject line, "Inheritance Restructure, Timeline and Terms." It was dated 2018, a reply thread between Carla and a financial advisor. I scanned through the content. Calm, calculated sentences about realignment of distribution to reflect direct contributions and shared priorities. The translation? They'd cut me out. Quietly, systematically, right after Elliot's third business failed. No drama, no conversation, just removal. "I found it in some of Dad's old printouts," Sharon admitted. "They never meant for you to see it. But now I had. And it wasn't rage I felt. It was confirmation. Like reading the minutes of a meeting you were never invited to, but that had always been about you." The next day, I called my lawyer and scheduled an appointment at her office. My name was officially removed from anything tied to the family trust. I signed documents removing Carla and Stephen from every emergency contact list. I revised my own will. Everything now went to charities supporting healthcare workers and trauma counselors. There was nothing petty in it, no vengeance, just clarity. Later that night, another message came through. This one from Stephen. Subject: clarification. "We need to talk. You've misunderstood everything." I didn't even finish reading. I forwarded it to my attorney and blocked the domain. There would be no more talks, just documents, boundaries, and peace. On my way home from the notary, I stopped at a donation center. I handed them a single silver-wrapped box. Inside was the last Christmas gift I'd ever bought for Carla and Stephen. It had been sitting in my closet for years, unopened, forgotten. It didn't hurt to give it away, it felt like breathing. At home, I lit a single candle in my apartment. Not for them, not for mourning, for space, for light, for me. I sat at my kitchen table and opened a fresh journal. Not to vent, not to unravel, but to write, freely, safely. This time, no one would steal the pages. No one would spin the words. And if they ever came looking again, all they'd find was silence and the sound of a door they couldn't open. I didn't expect to hear about my father again, but word travels, and sometimes it arrives dressed like a joke. A colleague from the hospital stopped me in the break room, her voice low but amused. "Hey, Yetta, your dad called the main line again, told HR you were mentally unstable." She paused for effect, holding her coffee like it was a punchline. "They told him, and I quote, 'We know who our staff are. Goodbye.'" I nodded, not even surprised. That game was old, but it was over. And now? They weren't just playing it badly. They were playing alone. The next envelope came by mail. Unmarked, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Sharon's. Inside, a printed page from what looked like a financial report, with a red underline under the figure, $24,385.72. Attached was a memo with Stephen's name, the company, a crypto startup that had folded 2 years ago, and scrawled at the bottom in thick black ink, "She pulled support, Elliot collapsed, so did we, she broke the chain." So that was it. Not morality, not principles, just math. Just blame. Just a fragile ego wounded by a failing investment and a daughter who refused to bankroll his next collapse. They didn't cut me off because I failed them. They cut me off because I stopped feeding a system that was built to bleed me dry. A week later, a letter arrived. This one handwritten, but delicate, clean, tucked in a pale yellow envelope with a small doodle of a sun drawn on the back. It was from Aileen. You reminded me what strength looks like. I'm staying in New York, I'm rebuilding from a different kind of silence. No pressure. But if we talk again, it'll be on clean terms. Respect. That's all. A. I ran my fingers over the ink. A part of me wanted to respond immediately, but I didn't. Not because I didn't care, because I did. Because for the first time, a boundary didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like an invitation to reconnect if and when we were both ready, with no conditions, no guilt. By the end of the month, Elliot had moved out of state. No farewell post, just gone. Rumor had it that 2 of his sponsors had dropped him, and a few more were re-evaluating partnerships. Carla and Steven put their house on the market, downsizing, they told people. But I knew what downsizing looked like when it wasn't voluntary. Neighbors said Carla had become private. Steven wasn't out much. And Elliot? Barely a mention. I didn't rejoice in it, but I didn't grieve either. They'd built a kingdom on silence and control. When I stopped playing my part, the whole illusion fell apart on its own. On Sunday night, I lit 1 candle. It wasn't for anyone. It wasn't for forgiveness. It wasn't even to mark a ritual. It was just light, because the room was dark, because I could. I brewed coffee for my shift, wrote 2 pages in my new journal, about patience, about gratitude, about not apologizing for peace. And before I stepped out into the snow-covered morning, I paused by the door. No one had knocked, but for the first time, I wasn't waiting. Not for explanations, not for apologies, not for closure, because not everyone learns to knock. But I'd stopped waiting by the door. And if you've made it this far, maybe you're wondering, was it worth it? Cutting ties, setting boundaries, choosing peace over performance? Let me say this. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I'd do it again. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they share your last name. You don't have to keep bleeding just to keep the family photo from looking messy. What they call keeping the peace is often just asking you to live in pieces. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And healing doesn't require their permission. It only ever needed yours. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who should have protected you? Do you believe family is earned or automatic? Drop your thoughts below, and let's start a real conversation. And hey, if this story hit close to home or gave you something to think about, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. If you disagreed or felt differently, I'd still love to hear why and where you're tuning in. I read every comment. This space is for you. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories that go deeper than just drama. Stories that say something real. Hit that bell so you don't miss the next one.